Tidal volume is the volume of air an animal inhales and exhales with each breath. In a human, it's equivalent to about 500 millimeters during resting. Vital capacity is the maximum tidal volume during forced breathing. It's about 3.4 liters, which is close to a gallon in females, and 4.8 liters, which is over a gallon in males. Residual volume is the air remaining in the lungs after we forcefully exhale as much as we can. It's impossible to completely collapse the alveoli. Birds have 8 or 9 air sacs that penetrate their abdomen, neck, and wings. They don't function directly in gas exchange, but they act as bellows that keep air flowing through the lungs. The air sacs in birds also reduces the density of the bird. Breathing control centers are located in 2 regions of the brain, the medulla oblongata and the pons. They set the basic breathing rhythm and they monitor CO2 levels in the blood, not oxygen. Hyperventilating actually tricks the breathing center. Excessive deep breathing rapidly purges the blood of a lot of CO2. In other words, when you start breathing fast and shallow, you wind up decreasing the amount of CO2 in the blood. When your brain registers a low amount of CO2 in the blood, it actually stops sending impulses to the rib muscles and the diaphragm. Breathing actually stops until CO2 levels increase. Then the breathing center switches back on. So if you start to hyperventilate, the reason that you breathe into a paper bag is because you're breathing out CO2, and if it's stuck in the paper bag, you're inhaling it back, which will increase the CO2 levels quicker in your blood, turning back on the breathing center. Gases in air or water depend on partial pressure. Partial pressure at sea level is about 760 millimeters of mercury. In other words, the atmosphere is exerting that much pressure at sea level. Since air is 21% oxygen, the partial pressure of oxygen is 0.21 times 760, which is 160 millimeters of mercury. The partial pressure of CO2 is much, much less, 0.23 millimeters of mercury. The amount of gas that dissolves in water is based on partial pressure and its solubility in water. Equilibrium is reached when gas molecules enter and leave the solution at the same rate. At this point, the gas has the same partial pressure in solution and in air. So, when we relate this to blood carrying oxygen and CO2, blood arriving at the lungs via the pulmonary artery has a low partial pressure of oxygen and a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide than the air in the alveoli. Since gases diffuse from regions of high partial pressure to low partial pressure, oxygen enters the blood and CO2 leaves the blood. Respiratory pigments in most animals transport oxygen bound to these special pigments instead of dissolving the gases in solution. Respiratory pigments circulate in the blood, and by gases bonding to them instead of just being dissolved in blood, it greatly increases the amount of oxygen that can be carried in the blood. About 200 millimeters of oxygen per liter of blood is carried this way. For example, hemocyanin in the hemolymph of arthropods, like insects, crabs, and spiders, has copper as the oxygen binding component. What that does is it causes the blood to be blue or greenish. If you ever squish open a bug, you're going to see something that's kind of like a greenish blue, because hemocyanin contains copper, not iron, like hemoglobin. If you think about the Statue of Liberty, she's made of copper, and what color does she usually look? Green, because when the copper comes in contact with oxygen, it oxidizes and turns green. Iron, on the other hand, will rust and turn a reddish orangey color, So iron in the hemoglobin of vertebrates, including yourself, when it binds to oxygen, creates the red color of your blood. Hemoglobin can carry 4 oxygens. When oxygen binds to one subunit of hemoglobin, it changes the shape of the other subunits, increasing the affinity for oxygen. When one uploads or releases its oxygen, the others quickly follow. Bohr shift is a drop in pH which lowers the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. When you combine CO2 and water, you create carbonic acid, which lowers the pH, inducing hemoglobin to release its oxygen. Therefore, active tissues that produce CO2 will lower pH and induce the hemoglobin to release more oxygen for cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide is transported in the blood, also sometimes on the hemoglobin. In addition to carrying oxygen, hemoglobin can also carry CO2. The carbon dioxide from cellular respiration is found in the blood, about 7% transported in solution in the plasma, about 23% binded to the amino groups of hemoglobin, not to the same places that the oxygen are bound. But 70% of the CO2 in the blood is transported in the form of bicarbonate ions. CO2 from respiring cells diffuses into the blood plasma, then into the red blood cells where it is converted to bicarbonate. CO2 first reacts with water to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid breaks into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Hydrogen ions attach to hemoglobin and other proteins, therefore they don't change the pH of the blood. Bicarbonate ions diffuse into the plasma. As the blood flows through the lungs, bicarbonate is converted back to CO2. Deep diving air breathers stockpile oxygen and deplete it slowly. A human can only hold his breath for 2 to 3 minutes and swim to depths of about 20 meters, which is 60 plus feet. But the Weddell seal, and the picture on the top is a Weddell seal, can dive 200 to 500 meters and last 20 minutes. Elephant seals, which is the one on the bottom, can dive 1,500 meters, almost a mile, and stay submerged for up to 2 hours. These animals have adaptations to store large amounts of oxygen. Compared to humans, seals store twice as much oxygen, mostly in the blood and muscle. About 36% of our total oxygen is in our lungs, 51% is in our blood. Seals hold only about 5% of the oxygen in their small lungs and about 70% in their blood. Seals have 2 times the blood volume than humans. They have a large spleen that can store 24 liters of blood. Diving mammals have a higher concentration of myoglobin, oxygen-storing proteins in muscles. Seals store 25% of oxygen in their muscles. Humans only 13% of oxygen in their muscles. Diving mammals also swim with little muscular effort. Their heart rate and oxygen consumption decrease during a dive. Fetal gas exchange occurs through the placenta. The placenta contains fetal and maternal tissues. Capillaries from vessels in the umbilical cord enter the placenta. This is where gas exchange occurs with the mother's blood that circulates through the placenta also. The fetus has special hemoglobin that attracts oxygen more strongly than the mother's hemoglobin. When a baby is born, carbon dioxide acts as a signal in the baby's blood. When CO2 stops diffusing from the fetus into the placenta, CO2 in the baby's blood rises and lowers the pH. In other words, when the umbilical cord is cut and the CO2 in the baby's blood no longer is leaving its body and going into its mother's blood, the CO2 starts to build up inside the baby, and when it gets to a certain point, it turns on those breathing centers for the first time, and the baby takes its first breath.